Originally, I was given a script that was 70 pages. I was a fugitive from a chain gang, and 30 pages, The Naked Prey, the most dangerous game. Set in America in 1933, and this was to be done in Australia with 10BA tax funding. And I thought, well, I don't think we can do this even on the budget that was intended. I think also I have a feeling we're meant to be making things that are actually set in Australia. So I suggested we kick it into the future and make it another genre hybrid along the following lines. 1984 meets The Camp on Blood Island, and they play The Most Dangerous Game, The Naked Prey, or Escape from New York in the Jungle. So that was my sort of genre cocktail, and Tony Ganane agreed, and we duly rewrote the script along those lines. Then, 2 weeks before shooting, when stories differ about how much of the budget turned up and how much did not, but my view was that half the budget did not turn up, and my 44-day schedule was to be reduced to 30. Solution to the problem appeared to be to tear out the first 15 pages of the 94 pages, and that was the 1984 part, the futuristic society that was then dominated by, basically, corporate fascism, and start the film at the prison camp. Okay, but how do we sort of fill in the backstory? Well, you'll work something out. And I did, but it had its limitations. The prison camp was built to hold 500. We couldn't afford 500 people. We could afford, I think, 75 on our biggest day, 50 on one of the battle scene days, 25 on a few other days, and down to 10 by the time we finished. It required a certain sleight of hand to try and populate that camp. I could see a disaster in the making. This is not the film that I hoped would show that we could make a high-level Hollywood action movie in Australia, with a big look, well-staged action, etc. We were in a situation where the stuntmen could not be paid any adjustments. They could be paid to turn up, and whatever they did was up to them. That was how poverty-stricken the budget suddenly became. And obviously it occurred to me at that time, now I could walk away from this, but that might cause the collapse of the enterprise, and people would go home and not get paid, and it would ultimately be attributed to me standing on my artistic dignity. Not that the Australian industry considered I had much at that time, but I would be the bad guy, and I wasn't going to be the bad guy. I was going to do what I could with it. So, rightly or wrongly, I decided to make it into a Lucio Fulci high camp splatter movie, because stunts may be expensive, but blood is cheap. I thought, well, let's have a black-hearted laugh at some of this, and let's come up with the worst things that you could do to a number of people. Why don't we riddle somebody with arrows and actually have a well-dressed woman do it? And let's literally blow people to pieces and have big chunks of them fly into the air. I'd seen it in Scanners, and I'd like to do it myself. Let's have a sexist would-be rapist shot with a dart in the groin. Let's have somebody rip somebody's toe off and eat it, and so on. So let's go to extremes, but do it in a kind of a high camp way. I was honest with my cast. I didn't actually say I'm now going to make a Lucio Fulci high camp splatter movie. I didn't put it quite those, but I said no. I've got to approach this in a slightly different way. But I will try and look after you as well as I can in all your scenes. And you know, I think they swallowed their sense of disappointment relatively easily during the shoot, because Cairns is a nice place to be when you finish shooting or when you have a day off. And coming to Australia, you know, is a unique experience if you've never been there before. I think, with the advantage of hindsight, when they you know, finally saw the film and heard of the way it was reviled in Australia, then they felt, you know, that, you know, they wished they hadn't been in it. I should have made more time to work with the cast, but really it ceased to be a film that was really about character. It was more about cartoon. So I directed it in a cartoonish way, and for many audiences, particularly those that are, you know, non-English language audiences, that worked very well. Get on to the next thing. I mean, I had to stretch 80 pages to 94 minutes. If I'd had that first 15 pages, the whole film would have had much more pace. So naturally, I think we spent far too much time in the prison camp, and we needed to be out there in the jungle doing frightful things to people. I don't think the cast were quite sure what they were in. They knew they were in something that was in a state of flux. And I remained confident and cheerful. And they could see I was under difficulties, but I didn't take it out on them. And I still thought that, you know, I could pack it with, you know, lots of good stuff. And, you know, I had a really good cameraman, John McLean, and I had actors who tried very hard. Oriana Pinozo, who is beaten to death on the parade ground in that early scene. She could see that this was an audience grabber of a scene, and she worked her heart out delivering the goods in that. And yeah, I was very pleased with what she did. That's the level that I would have liked to have reached with the entire cast. I took the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, high camp humor too far, probably in some of the scenes with Noel Ferrier and Carmen Duncan and others. Michael Craig, delivered a nice, controlled, low-key performance. He was perfect as Thatcher. Olivia knew she had this scene, which there would be a requirement for her to be topless. It was in the script, and she said to me privately, when we met in LA, "I don't think I have a good body." And I said, "Well, you could have fooled me." But she said, "I assure you, I really don't think I have a good body. And so could you double me?" And I said, "Okay, we'll get a body double. That's fine." Well, in the end, when you run out of money, the body double you get is the body double you could afford. And meaning no disrespect to the poor lady who provided the briefly glimpsed breasts. They didn't match. Now, should I have cut them out? Should I have not, used those shots? And possibly, if I was to do it again now, undoubtedly, I'd just make sure I had a good body double, and I would damn well make sure I got it. But it was a film made under ironclad financial restraints from a very tough production office. And to give them credit, that's what they had to do. They had to do their job. I had to do mine. In the end, I think it has enough sort of scenes for the fans that it did extremely well in the Australian drive-ins, and it did extremely well in other parts of the world. In England, for instance, it broke box office records at the Warner West End 2 in February. Now, it was foggy and rainy, but there was something about the film that they'd heard about, having a huge poster in the London Underground with Roger Ward bald, gleaming, maniacal, almost looking like a sort of muscular Fu Manchu, standing with his foot on Linda Stoner's arrow-ridden body. That captured the British public's imagination, and they'd also heard that the villain's name was Thatcher. The commandant of the prison camp was called Thatcher. Somehow the public sometimes has an ear, even in the pre-internet age. Somehow they hear these things, and people turned out in large numbers at the Warner West End too, where it was really meant to be a filler for a couple of weeks, and it did tremendously well in the provinces as well. So it did good business. In America, they kind of mishandled it and retitled it Escape 2000 and tried to sell it as an action picture, which I think they should have sold it for as what it was, and made it into much more of a horror movie. Our producer, Tony Ganane, entered Turkey Shoot into the AFI Awards that year, partly, I think, to just rub the AFI's nose in its naked commercialism, because he felt that the kind of films that people were making or feeling that Australia should be making were pretentious and ultimately financially unsuccessful, and as such, therefore, were injurious to Australia becoming a self-sufficient, self-financing film industry. As Tony was a very prolific producer, he felt that, I'm going to show people, the kind of stuff that they ought to be making as well as the slow-moving, pretentious stuff that they are making. Now, I think Tony could have chosen a better film to rub the AFI's nose in. It is a high camp splatter movie where genre aficionados will appreciate some of the references and will appreciate the ironic tone, but an audience that is basically like an undergraduate film society is not going to do that. And there are aspects of the film that are definitely bad. There's bad acting, bad staging. There are things that are quite good as well. But, it's not, I didn't set out to make Turkey Shoot the way it ultimately turned out. So, the audience was naturally appalled, and they'd never seen, let's say, they'd never seen certain acts of violence as explicitly depicted on the screen before. People were shocked, people walked out, people groaned in horror, and other people saw the opportunity to leap into print and publicly castigate the film and look good by doing so. There were people who thought that I would never make another film again as a result of Turkey Shoot, and shouldn't be allowed to make another film again. Should be run out of the industry. A lot of people got on their high horse, which is a nice place to be for some, and I realized it had damaged my career because it was not what I thought it could be, and it has professional shortcomings as well as, say, moral shortcomings, so I was very pleased to be offered BMX Bandits because a member of that AFI audience, Tom Broadbridge, had seen the professionalism that went into making the film to the level that it had achieved. In a strange way, that film specifically made him feel, this is an action director. Never mind how the film turned out. No doubt there were reasons for that, but this guy can direct action. And he has a sense of humor, admittedly a rather black-hearted one, it would appear, but that sense of humor probably can be translated to a kid's movie.
Turkey Shoot's another one of these, fun Ganane movies that always seems to, be yanked out when there's a bit of sort of controversy to be discussed. I guess there are 4 or 5 things to say about Turkey Shoot. I mean, the first is that we had some financial problems early on. We had budgeted the film at $2,500,000 round numbers, and at the end of the day, we didn't lose half the money. That I think Brian likes to exaggerate. We wound up losing about $450,000-$500,000. Now, I mean, that's in a sense a reasonable chunk of change, but on the other hand, for professionals like myself and Brian, it really shouldn't have been a big issue. The way I put it to Brian was that, you know, we had to find a way to make it work. One of the things that got lost as a consequence of the cut was a whole pre-credit sequence, which Brian was very fond of, which I thought was unnecessary, and personally the images that we now have in there, which are sort of a combination of newsreel footage and what have you, to create a fracturing of democracy and a sort of the development of the fascist state that Turkey Shoot set against, I think works much more cinematically and much more effectively. So it didn't really trouble me all that much. Obviously, we did as a consequence have to lose some days. Brian elected to stay on and, did a hell of a job. And I think personally, although I'm a big Man from Hong Kong fan, I think and I'm a big, of course, as I would be, Siege of Firebase Gloria fan, I think Turkey Shoot's probably arguably Brian's best work, notwithstanding the trimmings. The good thing about Turkey Shoot is that it allowed us all to have a lot of laughs at the expense of the film establishment and the critical establishment. We were able to, I was a willing partner in empowering and enabling Brian to really go nuts. And some of the sequences in Turkey Shoot are out there. It was a combination of, I guess, Man from Deep River meets, I don't know, a Cannibal Holocaust with a touch of The Most Dangerous Game. I think what some of the cast say today about Turkey Shoot may not well have been what they thought at the time. I think that the people who starred in Turkey Shoot had the opportunity at the time to sign the contract, cash the cheque and do the job, and they were all perfectly happy to do that. Thereafter, when the film came out, and the film was certainly within Australia largely critically derided, more than critically derided, castigated from the pulpits of churches. I think that some of those who are of a more sensitive nature decided to bolt for cover. Well, there you are. That happens. Looking recently at the resumes of the people who are in it, I haven't seen them remove it from their resumes. Olivia Hussey had certainly been in a number of movies, both major studio pictures and smaller pictures. Steve Railsback had gone from Stuntman, which had almost never been released, to Helter Skelter, which was an independent picture. I don't think that Railsback's performance or Railsback's role or Olivia Hussey's role was in any way modified, amended or ameliorated by the absence of dollars. That would ultimately be a case of going back through the files and looking at the original screenplay and looking at what was on the screen. With all due respect to Steve, I'm not sure that the state of his mind during that film was such that he could remember any of the pages. I think another thing about Turkey Shoot was just that whether it had been made for $2.5 million or the $2 million that it was ultimately made for, thereabouts, it was going to be a controversial movie. There was never any doubt that the content of the picture was what some people would call exploitative. It wasn't the Teddy Bear's Picnic. And we were trying to go the extra mile in ultra-violence in a humorous way, much like Clockwork Orange. The degree of violence shown in Turkish can only be responded to humorously. When we screened it at for the AFI award screenings in Melbourne and Sydney, and it was fun to be able to do that, because in those days an audience had to watch 20 minutes before, if they left earlier than 20 minutes, they couldn't vote for any of these films. So we knew that, you know, the powerful and the good and the meek and the great were going to have to sit through 20 minutes of the film. I was standing in the lobby, and some of these people came running out as if they'd just got a cell phone call that their child had been abducted at school or something. I'd never seen people move so quickly. And of course then there was dear old Philip Adams, not content with trashing Mad Max, decided that he'd better have a go at me, and of course came out and said, I can't remember his exact quote, but he probably said it was obscene and pornographic and this and that and the other thing, which of course Roadshow, who were distributing it, then jumped on and used in their print advertising. So what I hoped would happen, which was to create the same sort of controversy that I guess we did back in the day on Phantasm, we managed to do. The film was actually, ironically, probably, apart from the Phantasms, the biggest theatrical success in Australia of any of my movies, in terms of gross box office. It was not a big success, but given that none of my Australian films, with the exception of the Phantasms and Blue Fire Lady, were a theatrical box office success, it went off like a firecracker. And then, of course, once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know, 8 or 9 in a row, Bingo Bango, a great US release. Roger Corman bought it, retitled it Escape 2000, put it out, took a ton of money, got into trouble with the MPAA because he put back some sequences that the MPAA had told him to cut to get the R rating. The Americans got it. They thought it was funny. The Spaniards got it. French got it. Well, I don't know what's wrong with our Australian sense of humour. We can laugh at Barry Mackenzie, but we can't laugh at Turkey Shoot. Explain that to me.
What happened was I just finished a film which was pretty major for me called The Stuntman, and I was trying to make right choices. And we all screw up there somewhere. But I saw something that I thought was original, had an original idea. And it interested me. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen, but the script itself interested me, you know, and I said, yeah, I want to go do this. Well, when I turned up, the production problems probably started about a week in when they tore out the first 15 pages, and there's no beginning. They put in some stock footage, but that didn't help, which really upset me, because I came to do one film, and then it started to change. When you have no beginning, you'd have nothing. You're screwed. And so I wanted, and then, by the way, other pages were torn out too after that. Not just the beginning. I can't remember which ones, but I remember standing there when they went, you know, so I was getting pretty upset because I was led to believe one thing, and it turned out to be another. Now, they say the budget was cut from whatever it was, 3-something, and they cut, which they didn't tell me if it's true, weeks before, $700,000 was cut. Okay, well, and so they couldn't afford all these things. You know, I really believe, even if you only have $2.5 million left, in 1981 dollars, and U.S. dollars and Australia, you can do a lot. And I don't think it's a damn good excuse. I just think on $2.5 million, 1981, $2.5 million, you can do a lot more. And I hear that excuse, and I heard that excuse, and I just went bull. I said, whoa, wait a minute. Don't tell me that you can't get a few more extras. And, you know, I don't know where all the money went. I'll be honest with you. I don't think they shot it on $2.5 million, but I may be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But I was really getting upset because these actors, everybody was working their tails off. The crew were wonderful. The actors were working so hard. And I don't know where it went. I'm sorry. I'm not saying anything. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm not saying. I'm just wondering. It didn't look like a $2.5 million film. I don't know what $2.5 million is now, but with inflation, $2.5 million in 1981 seems like quite a bit of money. I really wanted to make something good because it was so interesting. The screenplay was so. It had things in it that were different at that time. They've been copied a lot of times, but at that time, it could have worked. But then people decide, what are they making? What's your point of view? What are you making? I don't think they had one. The only backstory of the show was me on that mic talking to people. There's more. The first 15 pages. I mean, he was an activist. Yeah, there was a lot about the character that's part of the 15 pages, you know. I did enjoy playing him though, but it did. It just turned into a whole nother movie. It became more of an exploitation picture because because that's what they decided to do. Now, I don't know if it was a decision that was made without my consultation, or not consultation, but something where I might know what I'm getting myself into and I'd have a chance to back out. Once I'm there, once I'm in it, I'm not going to walk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus and I'm going to try to do the best I can, because that's the only way I know how to work, is to dive in and just do it, you know, even knowing. And I'll use this word, you know, this thing was turned into a piece of crap. And I hated to see it. I hated to see it for everybody involved, because when you cut, just think about it. You take 15 pages and you go just literally like that, tearing them out. You got no opening. And then in other spots they tore out. They tore out just pages because they say they couldn't afford to shoot them. All I did was just try to go and just do and do the best I could. But I know it wasn't what was envisioned. I know it wasn't. I'm not sure what anybody thought they were making after a while, because with pages cut out like that, just torn out. I'm not talking about cut. I'm talking torn. You kind of lose. What are you making? I don't know. Tell me again. What are we making here? Tell me again. Okay. You know, I really didn't. I was getting very, and I never got in anybody's face, but I was getting pretty damn up. I was really getting upset. That's what was upsetting me more than anything. Watching the pages being ripped out. Just watching them. do it. And it just, that's what was upsetting. Was I close to walking? No. Once I'm into it, no. But I got to finish what I started. But I was just getting so angry that, and these excuses, and that's what they were, with excuses of why. Well, we only have 2.5 million left. Well, I'm sorry, 2.5 million in 1981 is probably closer to 9 or 10 here now with inflation. There's ways to do things instead of just tearing pages out so things don't make sense. I've seen it happen. I know it. I mean, I know you can. I know you can. I know you can even rent a helicopter. All he's got to do is fly. Pay him. What's it going to cost you? $1,000? So then you got 2,499,000. So, you know, I don't know. I'm just saying, why cut it? It's not. Don't give me the excuse. Well, we only have $2.5 million. We're going to have to cut it. I think there were other things going on. I don't know what they were. What I love about Australia and the way they bet, you have competing booths on odds. You know what I'm saying? In Queensland, you do. Like one guy might have 5-1, another guy might have 4-1, another guy might have 3.5-1, whatever. Yeah, they spend a lot of time at the track. Now, I don't think we shot it in $2.5 million. Okay. But yeah, they spend a lot of time at the track. I want to tell you something. Nobody should ever, ever, ever be hurt on a film set. And when they start using even blanks and shooting them at close range, you can get hurt. And to use real bullets, I didn't know that, but I'll tell you something. I would have stopped it if I'd known that. If anybody shot a real bullet at me, I didn't know this, but I did know about blanks getting too close. If I'd known somebody was shooting real bullets at somebody or anybody on that set, that's when I would have walked. I would have said something. Why? Why? What, for the sound effect? So you don't have to loop it? So you don't have to do it in an 80-yard stage or something? Don't tell me because you don't have enough money, you got to use real bullets. I got to use real bullets because I can get them for 2 cents cheaper. If I'd known that, and I didn't know it until this day, I'm telling you, I don't know what I would have done. I'd have blown up. I'm so tired of this. Cheaper and cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. Stay away from the track, and don't blame it on the $700,000 that was cut because it had nothing to do with it. Stay away from the track because that did have something to do with it. And that's as far as I'm going to go with it without getting sued, but it's the truth. I like Brian a lot. He's not necessarily an actor's director, but he's great with the cameras. He sets up, blocks, stuff like that. So, and he did that well. He spent as much time as he could listening guys into the gun. And they're telling him he can't do things because they can't afford it. Well, why? That's all my point is. I had a lot of respect for David Hemmings. But by the time we finished this film, I'd lost most of it. Hemmings, as talented and gifted as he was drinking, which is fine, just be a pro. But he was blaming Brian. You always got to blame somebody instead of take responsibility. And I think a lot of it was thrown on Brian. I think, if I remember right, was thrown on Brian, whereas Hemmings had no right to do that, take some responsibility. And everybody else. the people in power. You know, take some. Don't blame it on him. You know, and then don't take over shooting either. By the way, which is really just showing up the director who really tried to take something that was he tried his best, and they didn't take responsibility for this. So who else is going to throw it on? Let's throw it on Brian. Okay, I'll take over. I'll do this. You do this. I'll shoot. We'll call it B camera, but B camera is not shot with actors. It's usually a second unit, unless you're using two cameras. But you know, he'd do second unit, but really it wouldn't be second unit, it'd be first. You know? They call it Escape 2000, and then in the dialogue they say it's 1995. Listen, in the camp, somebody says, it's 1995, da-da-da. And I'm going, well, why is it called Escape 2000 then? I also noticed that let's see, at one point, I started off with the machete, then Olivia took over the machine gun, and then somehow ended up with not her machine gun, but another machine gun, and then ended up with a pistol, and then I ended up with something else, and I'm going, where did all this stuff come from? I can't remember, that's why, but I'm going, where did I get this pistol? Where did I get all these things? You know, I come up behind, who's a wonderful actor? He was a wonderful actor. Okay, but he was driving this tractor kind of thing, and I come up behind him with a machete, and I go, wham! And the next thing you know is you see this thing. It's like one of those arrows that go through your head, you know, and it's covered by hair, this part. And that's what it was, but it looked like it. It looked so cheesy. And it could have looked, get a special effects, it could work. But just with a simple cutaway, I don't know, it can work. But God, I remember that so well. I mean, it was a round thing, it was a machete, a round thing, and I went boom, and maybe they did cut away, and then you got this round thing on his head, and this thing looking like it's going through his forehead, which it didn't, because it's covered by blood. That's how they covered that up. There's a way to do these things, and they're not that expensive. I'm saying if you have a really good special effects guy, a really good prosthetics guy, you have a really good, you know, and it's not that expensive. I mean, it's just not what people tell you. I don't give a damn what they tell you, what the producers tell you. They can tell you anything they want, but I'll tell you right now, I know what you can do on $2.5 million today, and I know it. If you figure out inflation, you can figure out what you can do on $2.5 million in 1981, and it's just a cop out. To me, it is. And I felt bad for Brian. I felt bad for, you know, because everybody wanted to make something nice. That's why everybody was there, you know. And but I'll tell you what did work is when I blew that head off of Thatcher. But yeah, I thought that one worked in a way. But I thought that some of the things, you know, like the hands, Olivia cutting off the hands, they're just too clean. I don't know how to look for these little things, you know. Some people just love that gore and chopping hands off and faces blown apart. And some people just love that. It's just, it could have been better. It could have been so good. It could have been so good. And that $700,000 does not work. That is just, I don't give a damn what anybody says. You did not have to cut out the opening of that picture. It was bad film, great company, and a great crew. It really was. And you know, I guess people could look at it and say it's a good film, but they don't know the backstory. They don't know the backstory of what happened. That's what I mean. You know what? Everything we do, we learn from. We do. We learn from it, and it's fine. You know, it's past. I never look in the past. I just keep going forward. And in a way, I'm glad it happened because it was an experience that totally blew up my face, but didn't make it, and other people's. But it's still an experience.
The pitch to me with Turkey Shoot was that it was going to be very avant-garde, very futuristic, very brave, and I'm not sure what happened from the translation from the paper to the production, but something fell into a big abyss and turned out to be a little differently to the way it was sold. When I saw the script of Turkey Shoot and when I spoke to Brian Trenchard-Smith and Tony Ganane, the producer, the cast on the face of it and the script seemed okay. It seemed good. It seemed like a good project to be involved with. And the cast was terrific. It was good to work with Brian. But we lost some hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think, before we went into the making of it. And that kind of undermined the whole quality of the program. We also lost a few pages and didn't make any sense whatsoever. That didn't help either. We lost, the first quarter of the script, and $700,000 went missing, and that did impact on the quality of the film. And we were all acutely aware of it going down the rabbit hole, unraveling at a great rate of knots, and we're all in this little spiral. We were, the end result. There was no sense of the film being tongue-in-cheek at the beginning. We were still all very earnest. We were still set on a course of making a film that changed the world, great social conscience, and after 2.5 hours of the first day, we all realised that that was a load of codswallop, and what was happening is that we were only just hanging on, we were only just surviving. And it just did. It just rapidly unravelled and became a farce, worse than a farce, because we were still trying to take it seriously, and I think that was the saddest thing of all. No, it became, I don't know what it became. Every day was a new excitement. Every day was a new sinking to below what had gone the day previous to that. No, we could never predict just how bad it was going to get. So that was always exciting. You know it's unraveling. You know that we've lost it. And it becomes then a gore fest. It becomes then a search for the most gruesome, the most horrible, the most unimaginable. And I think Brian achieved that. He achieved it. The producer went missing somewhere in action. He didn't dare show his face on set. And so it was ultimately left up to Brian. And I think with the constraints put upon him, we still made a really crappy film. There was no time for discussions with the director. Brian was under a huge amount of pressure. He was being hammered by the producers, and there were producers with dissenting views about how the film should be made, and he was smack bang in the middle of it, trying to placate the actors who were unravelling at a great rate, and also, placating the money people, or what was left of the money, and trying to get something in the can at the end of the day. And for all that Turkey Shoot is a really, really awful film, it's been watched by so many people simply because it is so, so bad, and it has its own particular place, unfortunately, in this country's, fond memories of films that were made. David had a flaming ego, and Tony Ganane had a flaming ego, and again, as I say, Brian was stuck in the middle of it, and David was determined on getting his own way, and he I really didn't have much to do with him because he was the person who was in charge with the second crew, but I was well aware that he had a really unpleasant way of making people do what he felt they should do, and he was just a really arrogant, pompous person. Steve Railsback, I'd seen him in a film before we did Turkey Shoot, and it was Helter Skelter, and he was playing Charles Manson, and he was absolutely phenomenal. So there was a great deal of excitement about the fact that he was going to be participating in Turkey Shoot. People like Michael Caine and Olivia Hussey and the local actors. It was a really good cast. And Steve Railsback was a consummate professional throughout the whole thing. No matter what was thrown at him or what he had to endure, he did it with great good grace and professionalism. Olivia was lovely to work with. She was so sweet, and she was completely paranoid about anything that flew or wriggled or moved. And the thing is that anything that flew, wriggled or moved was in Turkey Shoot, so she didn't have to leave the set to be completely scared shitless. It was all presented to her during the film. Olivia is so beautiful. She's a drop-dead gorgeous woman, and I mean no disrespect whatsoever to the person who did her body double, but I think that Olivia should have just gone starkers and shown her own glorious body to the world rather than have the world think that that body was hers. I think she made probably not a good choice there. I was promised in Melbourne that there would be no nudity. That was a given. And the first night we had, when we arrived on set, I went out to dinner with Brian and Carmen Duncan, and I was told that there would be next day's filming would be shot in a shower scene, and that nudity would be required, and I was really pissed off and just said that I wouldn't. And so I became a troublemaker on set, immediately from that. So we ended up doing a compromise in the shower, and it was just revolting. It was just one of the myriad of things that were revolting about the whole filming of that film. It was just the pressure that was put on. We're there, everyone's being held up, there's crew time waiting, there's actors waiting, so you better do it, you better do it, you better do it. And it's just like that kind of pressure is unconscionable, particularly given the promises that were made before we went up there. Yeah, I was pissed off. Half the time I felt that I was in it for the wet clothing shots, and the rest of the time I actually felt okay with some of the stuff I did. I'm not going to put poo on all of it. Some of the stuff I did was okay, but yeah, there was a lot of wet t-shirt things happening. I ran and ran and ran and ran in that show. Yeah, ran wet, ran dry, ran through fire, ran through grass, ran. To what end, I don't know, and we only used about a minute of it, but I just ran and ran. Tried to run off the set, tried to run away. They kept finding me. Where I was actively involved in some of the worst bits were when Carmen Duncan was chasing down my character for her own nefarious ends, and we had to do this in a park in Sydney, and all they did was just pile on the blood until in the end a police helicopter flew overhead because they thought it was for real. One of my favourite moments is the hand that's been chopped off and it's still moving along the foreshore. And the torso, of course. So that's another memorable moment in Turkey Shoot, when there was a torso chained to a tree, and they went to a butcher's and found all sorts of offal and things, and that was hanging out. And so I guess it did distract from the poor quality of the script and everything else that was unraveling. There were distracting moments, those bits in the film. There were so many ways you could die while you were making Turkey Shoot, whether it was from flames or slipping in rivers and drowning or being skewered by something. There were always things falling or blowing up or just a whole manner of things. There was no safety. You just had to do it, actually. But there was no such thing as safety precautions. Nil, nada. somehow Turkish Shoot became Linda's film in some quarters. And I have great respect for Philip Adams, but he made a bit of a song and dance about the fact that he'd walked out of Turkish Shoot, Linda Stoner's film Turkish Shoot, and I became associated with the worst film that Australia had ever made, and I don't know how I got ownership of that, but yeah, it became known as, I don't know, somehow we were linked. Turkish Shoot and Linda were linked. In the end, I think Tony Ganane decided to work with all the flack that it was getting and how awful it was as a marketing tool in an inverse sort of way. And so people ran to see why it would, they wanted to see this truly, truly dreadful film. Can you imagine walking into the AFI Awards completely unprepared? You're going in to see this film, Turkish Shoot. It's got a reasonable cast in it, and and Brian Trenchard Smith, and you're sitting there, and your face is falling off. You cannot believe what you are seeing. No, oh my goodness, it reached a new milestone in really, really awful filmmaking, and. It hasn't affected Brian one iota. I know that Brian says that it killed his movie career in Australia, but, who cares? He's gone on. He doesn't stop working. He's infamous now because of Turkish Shoot, and that's been a springboard for Brian to go on. He doesn't stop working. So if that's a bad thing, I don't think it is. I could not bring myself to sit through that film again. Having experienced it and seen the rushes and... there's no way I was going to go to... Are you kidding? No. No, I did not see the film on the big screen.
I was aware of the fact they threw 25 or 30 or 17. You hear different stories. How many pages of the script they threw out, I don't know. Then I suddenly realised that things were happening and they had to push it forward. And I found out they'd thrown a few pages of the script out. As I say, you never really hear the right amount of pages. But my main concern was getting the money, because they told me that the money was tight, that there was no money about. And I was supposed to get $1,000 to shave my head for a starter. In actual fact, my agent had asked them, they said to me, shave your head. We want you to shave your head. That was that night that I arrived. And so I rang my agent and I said, mate, they want me to shave my head. He said, yeah, hit him for $1,000. I said, I can't, $1,000? I can't hit him for $1,000 to shave my head. The money's a bit short. He said, hit him for $1,000. I said, no, I can't. And I said, would you talk to Anthony Ganane, the producer? I didn't want to ask him. I couldn't say it myself. Put him on the phone, and Anthony got on the phone. I heard him, as I'm tiptoeing out of the theatre, out of the room, I heard him say, $1,000! I can remember when Roger Ward worked for $1,000. And I thought, oh God, out and slammed the door. And they paid me, no trouble. Shaved my head, paid me $1,000 for that. And I quite enjoyed the shoot. I loved it, I really enjoyed it. Steve Railsback, Olivia Hussey turned up. As far as I can see, they weren't overly concerned about the changes to the film. Again, they were probably only worried about getting their money, probably. Although Olivia Hussey seemed concerned about life in general, not the film. She was just concerned about living, waking up of a morning. Steve Railsback was worried about his acting. He was a method actor. I didn't see any concerns from them about the fact that they've thrown however many pages the script out. No. Olivia was wound up by the crew and even Steve Railsback. She was a very sensitive girl, and she was just concerned with day-to-day living. And I remember in the creek, which would have had crocodiles in, not sharks, and she and Steve Railsback were floating on a lamppost or something, a log of wood anyway. And Steve started to do the theme from Jaws. Well, she went hysterical. So she was a very sensitive girl. I remember driving out with her one morning in the car, and she said, I just didn't want to wake up today. I just didn't want to face the world today. That sort of girl she was, just off the air and sensitive, but lovely performance in the film. But David Hemmings was a lovely guy. a very strong guy. I mean, he's an actor and a very good actor, but as a producer and director, extremely talented. He took over a lot of the second unit shooting and did a damn good job with it. And it's a very strong personality. And I remember that scene in Turkish Shoot where I finally get my hands chopped off. He was directing that scene as a second unit. And Olivia had the machete, and she was the one that chopped my hands off. And she was again in one of her moods, a very timid mood, and very, she was sort of method acting, and she was really sensitive and shaking and quivering. She had that bloody machete in her hands, and I wanted to keep away from her, but she came up to do the scene, and she's got the machete over her head, ready to bring it down. And David says, "And cut!" And she goes, "Ah!" He goes, "No, don't cut, don't cut!" And he ran forward and grabbed her and dragged her off, you know. I mean, she was ready to go down with that bloody machete. She was off the air a lot of the time. But David was a very good guy, a very strong guy. The brutal scene that I beat the young lady up in the prison on Turkish Shoot, a very sensitive young actress, very good actress she was, and I had to beat her up, and I said to her, "Look, when I do this scene, I may seem like I'm a ruthless bastard, but you know, don't be concerned. I'm only acting, and I won't hurt you." So, "Oh, it's right. I'm an actress," and "I'm an actress," she said. And so I came to her, and I grabbed her by the shirt, and that's the only time she got a mark on her, because I did grab her very tightly, and my fingers digging into her chest marked her, but that was the only mark she ever got. But she was extremely good to work from, and I bashed her and beat her and never touched her once, but it looks like I belt the hell out of her, and threw her on the deck and kicked her, but of course there were sandbags I was kicking. She was out of scene, but I liked that scene, and I liked the way it ended up. As I've said before, another actor doing that, I may have felt a bit angry at that actor for being so arrogant. But that's the character I was playing, was a very arrogant sort of a guy, and I was quite happy with that scene. There was a scene in the swamp when they did tell me that they'd blown up the creek to scare any crocodiles off. But I found out that they'd blown up the other end of the creek, which would have forced the crocodiles towards the sea where they go. So they did, instead of doing it from the seaward end, they did it from the other end, and they would have forced the crocodiles down our way anyway. But I was in that creek, and it was neck deep, and it was filthy dirty. And I had to walk across it, and I said to them, "I'll give you one take." But they supposedly had stuntmen underneath me with air tanks on. Yeah, give me a break. They couldn't see an inch in front of them. You know, they weren't there. They were just kidding me. They said, "Oh, we got stuntmen under there with guns." And, well, yeah, sure. I'll believe you, baby. I didn't see them come up. Never saw them go in. Anyway, I went across and got out of there, and I said, "Right, that's the end of it. No more takes, baby." Because there were crocodiles I was seeing that morning. That's why they blew the damn thing up, to try and scare them out. But they scared them down our way. Bloody idiots. There's a poster about Turkish Shoot. It went very big in London. And strange, it lasted 2 days here, I think. No one liked it. But in London, it was a cult film. They loved it. And there's a great big poster above the theatre where it was showing in London. And I got a phone call from one of my buddies, a pommy guy. He said, "Hello." He said, "There's a bloody film going on over here, mate." He said, "It's a bloody big poof up there on the screen with a bloody bloke on the end of a lead, acting like a dog." He said, "And it's you." I said, "Oh, what?" He said, "Yeah, it's Turkish Shoot." I said, "What the hell have they done?" He said, "Oh, there's a big poster, mate. You know, you look really camp." I said, "Oh, thanks a bloody lot." Turkish Shoot seemed to upset a lot of people, apparently, for the violence, yeah. It was a violent film. I don't mind violent films, you know, I like being in them, and that didn't worry me a bit. And Mad Max was the same way, people running out of there, fainting in the audience and God knows what all. And I don't know, I don't mind it. But it was a violent film. And it had a cult following, and I guess that's what they were aiming at.
We were aware of the fact that there had a lot of money was gone for some reason, or the budget was overextended even before we started. For any specific reason, I don't know why that was. But it didn't seem to change what we were doing. It didn't seem to change whatever story there was. The story was of this futuristic prison with people in it, and the end destruction of it, and it was a bang-up shoot with some bare breasts and so forth and so on, and it was all very edgy, very I don't know what you call it. I don't know if it was entertaining or bad or what, but it was a picture perhaps that could have been left on the shelf. Trenchard Smith's good at that sort of thing. He's good at making splatter, and he's good at devising means where people's toes are ripped off and other people come along and eat them. You know, he's pretty good at that sort of a thing. He had his hand, so to speak, that he could go ahead and do it, because anything that produced a better result cheaply and quickly, such as eating somebody's ear, do it. Let's get that done. Anything that produced a gory look, do it. Brian Trenchard Smith's good at that sort of thing. And the more chance he had to do things like that, the better it became. They weren't too worried about safe procedures in a lot of this stuff, because a lot of those racing across the plains in those vehicles and everything wasn't safe, and nobody really checked out the ground they were racing over. So they probably treated the well-being of the stunt people with a bit of disdain, you know. And in other words, let's get it done. You know, the budget is here. Let's get it done. Sun's going down. Let's get this shot in, regardless. So maybe that was part of the concern too. And looking at Olivia, she's a very nice girl, very appealing girl, quiet, inoffensive. Maybe that was the problem. You wouldn't hear a bad word come out of her mouth, and because of that, her actions on any part of the film where she has to be a little bit outgoing, perhaps, she wasn't. She was worried about the creepy and crawlies in Australia. She was worried about, and a lot of people, you know, they kidded her about things. They had a little game, you know, telling her how there's no snake in Australia that's not poisonous, you know, and careful the spiders that come out of a trap door. And, you know, they had the poor girl worried about these things. And the flying nasties and things, and the green ants that got on your skin. You know, she had to be very careful of everything. And basically, she didn't want to move too far from home and that. We're supposed to do the shower scene. And I'm a licentious sort of a guy that's supposed to go in there and want to use these women up to some extent, whatever it might be. But we managed to get her gown exposed and expose her breasts. And she didn't want her breasts exposed, so we used the breast double. And I'm sorry, I thought hers were a lot better, to tell you the truth. And why she had a double for her breasts, I'll never know. But it was sort of the story of her, that she wouldn't broach that part of it, even though it would appear that she did. And she would demand certain things. That was one of them. I mean, I would have felt, holy macaronis, you know. You're going to use those as my breasts? I mean, it just didn't seem right. I thought I had a little more pride in how I looked. But she allowed that girl, and there was a total difference between body types and total difference between boobs. And but there it was, and she wouldn't really allow her own breasts to be exposed in that regard. I think it was a tongue-in-cheek type thing, because nobody could take it seriously. I didn't think it was just a slam bang together action, sort of a way out flick that didn't take too much cerebellum to appreciate. It was a picture being made maybe for the Asian market. Who knows? You know, it was that kind of a picture. It really didn't touch the radar screen very much in our country here. I remember one time my niece came from America, and she wanted to show her younger boys what I had to show them. She said, "Do you have anything to show?" I said, "Oh, I got something." She said, "Could they see it?" And I said, "Sure, it's all right for them to see it." So I gave them turkey shoot. She came back to me and said, "How dare you give my children that to see?" And I couldn't believe it. I thought it was, it wasn't that bad, you know.
Oh, every time somebody mentions turkey shoot to me, I just laugh. I had a great time on it and loved working on it. one of the best times I had. There was so much trouble with that film. I remember when I first got asked to build things for it, and halfway through my pre-production I was told, you know, they'd lost half the money, and they'd re-changing the script, and half of the things I'd built weren't going to be used, and could I remake different ones, and it never stopped changing like that. The film went up and down. There were stories from the crew that, you know, the producers were out at the race courses every day gambling to get more money. Scripts were being written every day. One of our stunt guys got shot with a real bullet. We had real glass being exploded in front of actors and real bullets fired into the ground. And that was just from the special effects department. You know, if we got into production, it was even worse. We had a special effects department from overseas, without naming anyone, but there wasn't a lot of budget for anything, and I'll have to sort of be nice and say maybe that was the reason, but we actually had live ammunition being used on the film, fired at actors to hit rocks nearby, to actually hit the sand. We had real explosives blowing up the set. I remember standing at least a quarter of a mile away on a hillside while the actual main part of the set was blown up, and part of that tower that you see blown up and fall over flew a quarter of a mile past us, past the producer's head, and landed in the electrics van. It was some scary times there. We had a stuntman, Glenn Boswell, who now is one of the top stuntmen in the world. He was crossing the river in a scene, and we had a group of stuntmen in a line crossing the river. They were told to follow this line, and some explosions would go off nearby, and there'd be some bullets ricocheting across the water. Everyone was expecting for bullet hits actually under the water going off, which is the way it's done. Glenn actually was walking across the water, felt a sharp pain in his side, put his hand there, walked across, fell to the floor pretending to be dead. When the scene was finished, he got up and found he was still bleeding. On examination, we found there was a bullet embedded in him. He was taken to hospital. He was fine, back working a couple of days later. When we were in Darwin, we were in a little billabong waterhole, and these are the days where we didn't have safety and safety organisers and sort of special reports written for each scene and risk assessments. I remember in this billabong, the two of them floating on a log, and I was standing there watching them. We were filming, and a truck drove up, and it was a local ranger. And he wandered up behind me and said, "G'day, you know, filming here, are you?" And I said, "Yeah, you've got a couple of actors in the water." And he went, "Uh-huh." And I said, "Is that all right with you?" And he said, "Yeah, it's fine with me." He said, "I wouldn't be in there." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "There's a huge female crocodile that lives in that billabong, and she's just laid some eggs right behind where they're filming, you see." So I remember at that point my heart sort of racing, and sort of wandered over to the first assistant director and sort of warned them that we should remove our two actors. There's a large saltwater crocodile that might eat them, you know. Some of the scary scenes in the film for us, such as when the cane was set alight. Now, if you live in Australia and you go up north, every couple of months in the sort of summer months, the cane is burnt. And you'd normally light a fire along the edge of the cane, and it goes straight through, and it burns very hot and very quickly. There are water trucks standing by to put it out. When we filmed the cane burning, we had no water trucks, and we had the local farmer who sort of went, "Yeah, the wind's good, we'll light it here, it'll go that way." So then we'd put our actors in there, and we had Roger Ward running alongside the fire. Now, this fire on the cane can change at any instant, but he was very, very close. Noel Ferrier was an actor that supposedly dies in the fire. He almost did die in the fire. We were in a clearing where we actually had him in this clearing and with a small crew, and they lit the fire. The wind changed, and we had to get out of there quick. And I remember running with Noel, carrying gear, camera equipment, and we were running for our lives, laughing and joking. Crazy when I think of it. When I first read the script, and I remember I had like 8 actors, Carmen Duncan and all the major actors. They all came to my house on the one day to have their heads moulded, you know, and it was like 8 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. And they were eating and drinking in the workshop and having a great old time. We were talking about the film, and everyone was full of enthusiasm and talking about the story, and it was great. And halfway through the film, I remember having lunch with the actors, and none of them knew what the hell was going on, what the film was about. Everything had changed, but you know, our courageous director sort of held it together. And the reason I think I love it, and most of the crew, in fact all the crew that worked on it, I think love it, was because of our director, and we would all do the same again for him. Olivia Hussey had been, when she arrived in Australia and got onto the set, she was scared of everything. Now, people at home in Los Angeles had got her really uptight, and of course once the crew found out about this, they would start talking about, you know, the most venomous snakes in the world that lived where we were going to film, and crocodiles and spiders. She actually didn't like to walk out of the caravan. She preferred the on-set type of stuff, didn't like actually coming into the native flora and fauna, which we shot. We just pulled off the side of the road and would wander off into the bush and film. It wasn't much location scouting, we'd just pull off the road. So she was always sort of looking over things and saying to me, "Bob, could there be anything there? Could there be anything there?" And I remember her lying down in the grass at one stage with Steve, and she sat up, and as she sat up, a locust hit her on the chest. Well, I remember her words were, "Oh my God, what is this?" You know, and she just froze, pointing to this. She just froze. She thought it was going to kill her. She ended up having more and more blood drenched over her, as well as Steve. In fact, whenever we couldn't work out what to do, I always remember someone saying, "Let's put some more blood on them." How they ever stayed sane, but they did. And I think, well, maybe they trusted our director as well. David Hemmings, it was amazing to work with him. I mean, I did most of my work on that film on second unit, or the Blood and Guts, and David was the second unit director. I remember the scene where one of our actors gets his hands chopped off. Now, we had 2 silicone hands made, and the hands were supposed to be chopped off, and it was supposed to be really the end of that scene. And we were just he was going to hide his hands underneath his armpits, covered in blood. And David, right at that second of chopping the hands off, said, "I tell you, look, Bob, why don't we just pull his hands up into his jacket?" And I said, "Well, you know, that's been done in the sort of 20s and 30s, and it's awful." He said, "No, it'll look great, you know, like this." So he said, let's put some meat in there, you know. And I remember him sending one of the runners off to the local sort of butchers, and they came back with a handful of steaks, and this actor had to hold these steaks and hide it. And to this day, I can still see this actor running around with his extra long arms with lumps of meat, and I'll never forgive David for that. You know, the actor that actually had his hands up his sleeve, Roger Ward, he had some scary moments. Everything we had was real. Like, we have machetes, they were real machetes. No one thought of actually making an aluminium one. It was a machete, and nobody even thought of making it dull. It was sharp. The scene where Olivia chops Roger's hands off, she has a live machete, what we call a live machete, a sharp machete. So she picks this machete up, and he's got his hands pulled right back, and we've got an artificial sort of wrist, and then we've got the false hands. But his arms and hands are still in the sleeves, and he's actually got them on a slab of rock. So she brings the machete up, and David says, "Cut," meaning cut, stop the film. She thinks he means cut. So she goes for it, and she's slashing away, and Roger's lying there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's going to chop his arms off, which she could have done. And she came down and actually was sort of mulching into these hands, missing his real hands by inches, you know, and we had to physically jump up and grab her and calm her down. There was a particular scene in this with Linda Stoner. Now, Linda was a vegetarian, a strong sort of macro-vegetarian, and an animal rights activist. And there was a scene, in fact, where she had to kill some fish, which were already dead, and gut them. So she had to hit them on the head, gut them. She wouldn't do it because they were fish and they were alive. She wanted rubber fish, and we didn't have the budget. And we actually had a double actually do the killing of the fish and gutting, And she did agree to sit with them at one stage, but she hated it. And the scene where Carmen Duncan kills her, fires the arrow, and we end up with Linda Stoner sort of in her sort of bodysuit with sort of breasts half out and blood trickling down and an arrow poking through her mouth and out of her cheek. This was sort of pushed back until we actually got back to Sydney, and then somebody remembered actually that we hadn't shot it, and it was just forgotten. And I got a call, and we were sort of wrapping the film up, and could we come out to the local national park, Lane Cove National Park, and film. Now, we didn't have any permission to film there, of course, in those days. So the small sort of reduced film crew went off, laid this half-naked woman in the bush with an arrow, started filming her. And as it was, quite accidental, a police helicopter flew over. So we stopped filming while the helicopter went over. And of course, all they could see was this half-naked woman lying in the bush with an arrow poking through her, covered in blood. And they hovered and came down, and we were all trying to wave them away, which made them even more suspicious. And they landed down the corner and came and had a chat to us and told us off. And Linda gave them a bit of a smile, so it was all good. We realised the money was going. I started to get worried whether I was going to get paid, like most of the crew. And Brian would say to me, "Okay, Bob, we've scrapped those like 10 pages, and we've got to, fill in something. Who can we kill, and what's the bloodiest way we can kill them?" And I remember Alf, the big character, and he was going to actually be held upside down, I think, originally, and split open, and then we thought, well, we could run him over with something, and then the idea of a tractor running him over. And then I remember the production designer coming up with an idea of if he made a false tree and we cut a hole, we could stick Alf's real legs in and have the bulldozer crush him, which looked great on camera. But, I mean, it's a bit cheesy, but we had to come up with ways of killing them off all quickly.